And I've seen the issue evolve quite a lot over that time, although the one fortunate thing is we haven't seen these trees actually released on a commercial level in large scale yet. There has been some release of genetically modified insect-resistant poplars in China. Aside from that, though, we've managed to keep them out of Latin America, North America, Africa, Asia, and well, except for China, and Europe. So. And they're not in Antarctica yet, which is good. The reason that we got involved in GE trees in the first place was because we found out that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, this COP that's happening here, had agreed that genetically engineered trees could be used in plantations, tree plantations designed to store carbon at their meeting in 2003, I think it was, in Milan. And so we heard about this and we thought, well, that's just a really stupid idea, so we should go and tell them that and make them change their decision. And so we went to the climate COP in 2004 and quickly found out that the UN does not reverse decisions. It does not even revisit decisions. It just kind of goes along with their bad decisions and makes everything even more and more complicated, convoluted, and, well, kind of stupid, really. So that's why we're here, and we've kept coming back, is to use these forums to anybody have any idea what's going on?
Oh, yeah. Let's have a look. It's like a computer switch.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. I'm done. Anyway, so we got involved in this to network with our allies, to use the fact that there's a lot of media here to get information out to the wider public about genetically engineered trees, and to make the industry nervous. And so we work at the Framework Convention on Climate Changes, and we also work at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, where we've had some limited success with the global governance issue in getting decisions by the UN that warn countries that there are potentially serious consequences to using GE trees and advise them to approach the issue cautiously. And this has made industry very nervous. And in fact, one of the big GE tree promoters in the US, after we won a decision at the last UN CBD meeting, not the last one, the one before that in Bonn in 2008, wrote an article about how we made it very difficult for GE tree development to move forward, called, oh boy, what is the article called now? Strangled at Birth. Strangled at Birth. The global governance of genetically engineered trees, because we were trying to strangle this technology before it even got off the ground. And in fact, that is what we're trying to do. So we actually had a lawsuit in the United States, I'll talk about that a little later, to try to stop the development of genetically engineered, non-native, fast-growing, cold-tolerant eucalyptus trees. But here at the UN, what they're trying to do, you've probably heard people talking at this event and at this event today specifically about REDD, the policy to reduce emissions from deforestation and forest degradation that's been a big deal at the UN Climate Convention since 2007. Well, now they're trying to both promote REDD, this reducing emissions from deforestation scheme, at the same time that they're trying to promote these wood-based energy schemes and wood-based climate mitigation schemes. So what you've been hearing about with biochar, with biofuels, with biomass-based electricity, all of these things that require massive amounts of wood are being pushed forward under the same climate mitigation umbrella as the reducing emissions from deforestation scheme. Which, if you think about it for more than about 2 seconds, you find out that, oh yeah, that actually doesn't make any sense at all. You can't reduce emissions from deforestation at the same time that you're massively increasing deforestation. You just can't do it. But the timber industry, fortunately, doesn't use a lot of logic, so they think that this is going to work perfectly for them because they can use genetically engineered trees. So the idea is that they're going to create these trees that can grow much more densely on land, that can grow much more quickly, which has all kinds of negative impacts on the soil and the water and both the groundwater and the surface water. But they think that they can do this and it will be just dandy. We can have as much wood as we want, we can increase the demand for wood, and we can store carbon in the trees that are growing, and it'll be just peachy. Of course, they also don't distinguish between what a plantation is and what a forest is. They think they're both the same thing. So theoretically, they want to cover the globe with these genetically engineered tree plantations and solve all the problems of the world. But, of course, when you do this, the massive demand for wood that increases because of using all of these wood-based bioenergy, biomass schemes puts out a lot of carbon emissions, not only from cutting the trees and burning the trees, as Rachel described, but from the actual conversion of land when you take what it was a native forest and you turn it into a monoculture industrial tree plantation, huge amounts of carbon are released into the atmosphere that then, contribute to climate change. So the World Bank is involved in this, of course, and the World Bank actually came to the the World Conference on Forestry? No, what is it called? World Forestry Congress?
Yeah.
World Forestry Congress in 2009 in Buenos Aires, and I went down for that to listen to what industry was saying about GE trees and all of these wood-based climate mitigation schemes. And they were so excited about REDD. They specifically loved the idea of REDD because it meant that they could make money off of cutting down their trees, and they could also make money off of the trees that they left standing. So they thought that was just the best thing ever. They were practically drooling. You could see these timber executives, looking at all this money. And the UN Secretariat, the UN Climate Secretariat came, and she talked about, REDD Secretariat came and talked about how they'd make $45 billion off of this, and the World Bank came and talked about how wonderful it would be. And but unfortunately, the people who lose out are the people who live in those forests now, and the people who want to see the forest protected, because what this does is it opens the gates for not only protected areas that then exclude people from living in them, but also to the expansion of genetically engineered and other industrial tree plantations. And but they insist that using these fast-growing trees, especially eucalyptus trees, that's one of their favorites, or poplar trees, that's their second favorite in areas that are too cold for eucalyptus to grow, is a great way to fight climate change. And in the U.S., as I mentioned, they are genetically engineering eucalyptus trees, which normally grow in tropical and subtropical areas, to be cold tolerant down to, I think it was about 16 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around around minus 8 degrees Celsius, so that they could expand the range of eucalyptus. Right now, eucalyptus are a plague, on the kind of this belt around the globe, where they suck up all the water, they take all the nutrients out of the soil, but they grow very fast, so the timber industry likes them. But they've been restricted where they can grow them because they can't tolerate the cold. So now they're making them genetically engineered to tolerate the cold, so that the bands where these trees will grow are expanded. So they will grow further to the north, further to the south, and higher up in altitude, so that they can bring the plague of eucalyptus trees to larger areas. And we think that's a very serious problem, and are fighting it very, very hard in the U.S., which is sort of where they're trying to push it first. Poplar trees, where they can't engineer eucalyptus trees to grow cold because it's too cold, are also extremely dangerous, but they're dangerous for a different reason. Whereas eucalyptus trees are very invasive and can get out there, and they are highly volatile, they catch fire, and they just deplete the water in the soil, which I mentioned. Poplar trees have native relatives that grow in areas very close by where they want to plant these genetically engineered poplar trees, which means that they can spread their pollen and seeds literally hundreds of miles and contaminate native poplar trees, which then will contaminate more trees in an endless and irreversible cycle. So we're trying to point out that this is a very bad idea, and why we've gone to the UN level, where we've asked for a global ban on genetically engineered trees. We haven't reached the global ban yet. We've gotten language cautioning countries. We haven't gotten the global ban yet, but just saying the word global ban makes industry very nervous. So we like that, so we keep doing it. As I mentioned, GE trees used for carbon sinks or agri-fuels. One of the things that they want to do with these trees is modify them specifically so that they're easier to digest into liquid fuels. Turning a tree into liquid fuels is very, very difficult because all of the energy in the tree is locked up in this compound called lignin. And so they want to make these trees that have reduced lignin or easily digested lignin so that they can get at the energy, the sugars in those trees, and turn them into liquid fuels more quickly and more easily. But that has a whole host of problems all of its own. Low lignin trees, when they die, they rot more quickly, which means they put out all of that carbon that they're storing into the atmosphere more quickly. That it causes problems when they decompose. They change the soil structure. All of these problems, because forest ecosystems are very complicated, complex things, and you can't just tweak these trees according to what you want them to be, have them escape, and then think there's not going to be major repercussions to this. And the problem right now is that agri-fuels use more more energy to produce the liquid fuels than they actually get out of the trees. So it's negative in that sense. But they're working on that by genetically engineering enzymes to make the trees easier to digest, as well as genetically engineering the trees themselves. And ideally, one of the projects they're working on is making trees that actually have a compound in them so that the trees start to digest themselves prior to being cut down. I tell you, these guys are nuts. And wood-based electricity, as people were mentioning earlier, puts out more pollutants than coal. So it's not clean energy in any sense of the imagination. These are our friends, ArborGen. They're the people that are trying to put out all these genetically engineered eucalyptus and poplar trees. And their favorite thing, their motto there is more wood, less land. They insist that developing GE trees will protect native forests because we're taking the pressure off of them by growing more wood on less land. So we can meet this increasing demand for wood just by growing trees faster and more densely. But as Rachel pointed out, the amount of wood that we're talking about for all the things that they want to do will require 6 planets. So the idea that they're going to create these genetically engineered trees that can produce 6 planets worth of wood on the amount of land that they're currently using with plantations to take the pressure off of native forests is complete fantasy. There's no actual reality to that whatsoever. And if you look at their information, it's basically they've created their public relations scheme. They're sticking with it, regardless of the fact that it makes no sense. But that's what they do. And in fact, the woman who is the communications director for ArborGen came up to me at a conference on GE trees recently, and she complimented us on our communications that we have for the Stop Genetically Engineered Trees campaign. And I wanted to say to her, well, it's really easy to craft messages when you tell the truth, unlike what they're doing, which is, lying. So GE trees will actually replace existing forests, not protect them. And this is an example in Chile of radiata pine plantations over what used to be native forest. This vast expanse of land used to be covered by native forests and now is covered by radiata pine plantations. In South Africa, it's native grasslands that are largely getting hammered by these tree plantations. So native ecosystems are extremely endangered by tree plantations, and especially GE trees, because they will be considered more economically valuable because they're easier to digest into paper or liquid fuels, and because you can grow more of them on less land. You can grow more of them on less land, but that just means there's going to be more demand for them to expand the plantations over what these slow-growing, very difficult to deal with native forests. We tweaked their motto just a little bit. More clones, less forest is what their motto really should be. And as I mentioned, escaping GE trees will be very detrimental. In China, where they have these insect-resistant poplar trees, there was a study by the Nanjing Institute of Environmental Science that found out that these genes had escaped into some of the native poplar forests in the area. And this is a big problem because they're insect-resistant, which means they have this gene, this insecticide built into the tree called BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. It targets caterpillars, which is the big problem they were having in China. What happened was a lot of deforestation had happened in China. There's a lot of desertification that's happening in China as a result. So they decided to put in, instead of replanting the native forest, restoring the forest, they decided to put in these huge plantations of poplars that got completely wiped out by insects. Because it was a monoculture, because it was even-aged. Basically, the insects looked at this poplar plantation and said, ooh, free lunch. So they decided then, okay, instead of taking a step back and figuring out how they could interplant different native species and reduce the predation by insects, they said, well, how about we just make these trees insect-resistant, and so the entire tree is a pesticide, and that will deal with the problem. And so that's what they did, and now they found out that this insecticide is contaminating the native poplar trees, which is a big problem because songbirds, when they nest, the caterpillars that are being targeted by this insecticide are a key food for the songbirds. So it's a big, it's a big problem. That's just one example of how these things impact non-target species, but it's a very serious issue with the escape of GE trees. And it's inevitable that these trees will escape if they commercialize them. They argue that, this is a classic argument, that if you make agrofuels or liquid fuels out of trees instead of food, like corn or sugarcane, then they won't compete with food anymore. But the common denominator here is land. You still need the land to grow the trees. And if you're using the land to grow the trees, you're not using the land to either be forested or grow food. So it's still competing with food. In Chile, I showed you the pine plantations. Well, in Chile, the other thing that's happening is many of the Mapuche communities are being pressured by the government financially to grow tree plantations instead of food. And so as a result, a third of Mapuche communities are living in poverty because of this trend toward growing more trees on food-producing land. So this is just an outright lie that growing liquid fuels, making liquid fuels out of trees will mean that they won't compete with food. And then, of course, they use the marginal lands argument, which is a major thing here in Africa, where many of the lands that they're targeting are called marginal lands just because they don't produce a lot right now, but they're key lands for people that use them. I already talked about that. The tree plantations use huge amounts of water. Again, in Chile, we use Chile a lot because we were down there and had a lot of meetings with the Mapuche people who took us on a tour of their communities. And some of the communities that used to have year-round access to fresh water now have to truck in water for parts of the year because they no longer have any access to fresh water for periods of the year. And the other parts of the year when they do have water, the water is highly contaminated with all of the chemicals they put on these GE tree plantations. So herbicides, fertilizers, insecticides, all of these things. The pine plantations in the southern U.S., which are not genetically engineered, but where these GE eucalyptus are planted, already use more chemicals just on those plantations than the rest of the world, because they are grown so intensely and they have so many problems with insects and so on. They're incredibly toxic, these plantations. So in addition to all the other problems, they cause human health impacts. And there's the land grabs issue. I'm not going to talk about that too much because I think that'll be covered by others. But expanding tree plantations requires land, as I said. And so the land that's being targeted for this expansion is land that doesn't have proper title by indigenous peoples or the communities that are living on them. So they're very much threatened with displacement with the expansion of these plantations. Let's get that. Talked about that already. I think I've covered most of it, but I just want to, mention that not only do these tree plantations and genetically engineered trees are a human rights issue, they're a biodiversity issue, they're a climate issue. They're basically all around. The only thing that they're good for is making profits for corporations and the people who run the corporations. It is, we hear all of this information out there about the 1% and the 99%. Well, tree plantations are for the 1%. They're not for the 99%. Although they keep trying to sell them to us by saying, well, you need to have paper, you need to have all of these wood-based materials. And I come from the United States where there's enormous waste. With all of the wood that's cut down, and off of the national forests, which are largely logged in the United States for industry's benefit, 7 out of 10 trees that are cut in the national forest go straight into the landfill, either because they're made into packaging or cardboard or pallets or some disposable thing that is just going straight into the landfill. And clearly there are ways that we can reduce in the global north, in countries like the United States, the amount of wood that we're using. And if we could do that, we would not have any need for genetically engineered trees, and we could reduce the number of plantations in the world and eventually phase them out by reforesting and regrowing the biodiverse, wonderful native forests that the globe really needs and that the climate needs and that people need, instead of moving the exact opposite direction into genetically engineered trees. I'll leave it at that, but we have lots of information on our website, which is here somewhere. Oh, I went too far. There it is. So you can check out nogetrees.org if you want more information on this.
Thank you very much, Anne.